On this channel, I specialise in making really complex looking images easy to create. So just follow along with my step-by-step tutorial of this painting and you will amaze yourself. Okay, so as always, I'm using the iPad Pro and the app Procreate, but I don't see any reason why you couldn't follow along with my techniques and process on a different app on a different tablet. Having said that, within the app Procreate, I've opened an A4 default canvas, which is 297 by 210 millimeters, not pixels, and that's at 300 dpi. In terms of the brushes, I'm going to be using within Organic, the Rainforest brush, within Artistic, the Leatherwood brush, and within Airbrushing, the Soft brush, and probably the Medium brush too. In terms of the colours, I have pre-selected some colours, and each of these colours has what we call a hexadecimal code linked to it. Each of these codes is down in the video description and you can just take a note of them, type them in here one at a time, press enter, the colour appears up here and then you can piece it together yourself. Or next to the codes is a link that takes you to my Patreon page and you can download the whole colour file for free to save you some time. And lastly, if you like this kind of tutorial, please make sure to give this video a thumbs up, hit the subscribe, and don't forget to hit that bell notification to make sure you're notified of all my future videos too. And with all that said and done, let's get started. So we're on layer 1, go to our colours. I'm going to go to the first colour on the top row, which you can see is blue, but it's almost quite greyed out and pastel. And then we're just going to drag to flood fill the entire canvas, like so. Now much of this blue we're not going to see because we are going to obscure it with other details. So we're going to create a new layer on top of that, layer 2. I'm going to go to my third colour, which you can see is a yellow-orange and a little bit pastel too. I'm going to go with the soft airbrush, or soft brush within airbrushing. I'm going to put the size at 15% and the opacity at 100%. And about 2/3 of the way down, I'm going to do a stripe of this colour. And then I'm going to go to the adjustments, Gaussian blur, and blur it in 100%. And it just gives you a little bit of a gradient from the blue down to these warmer colours, where we're going to have the horizon and a really vivid sunrise. I'm going to create a new layer on top of that, layer 3, and we're going to change brushes to the Organic Rainforest brush. And looking back at our colours, we're going to go for the second colour this time. So we skip that colour, but we're going to go back to it. And I'm going to put this brush size at around 5% size and about 30% opacity. And to begin with, I'm just going to start bringing in some of this texture at the top. I'm allowing it to build up quite sizable chunks that connect together, but I'm also going to allow for gaps that show through some of that lighter blue. So I can create just a bank of that cuts across, maybe reduce it down to the 3% and then another bank of it cutting through for another shape through here. You can probably hear me tapping it in. So I'm doing a slight sweeping gesture but also tapping it. Maybe just have another one that kind of cuts through a little bit, something like this. Then I'm going to go to the adjustments, Gaussian blur, blur it in quite significantly to about 10%. Okay, I'm then going to go in again with the same colour, still with the Rainforest brush, but I'm going to set it down to about 2% size and a smidge lower, so about 20% opacity. And then I can just begin piecing some slightly sharper textures again, especially in and around this sort of edges, so we get some little breakaway pieces. We don't need to do too much of this though. It's just going to add a little bit of variety to that texture. Okay, I'm going to create a layer on top, so layer 4, and I'm going to change to the Airbrushing soft brush, and I'm going to use the fourth colour along. I'm going to put it to about 20% size and about 10% opacity. And just where it meets that horizon line, I'm going to do a couple of lines and then just sort of build that upward from there. So a lot of the bluey purples are going to become more warm and blend into this warmer colour. And we can take it up. I don't want to take it right up to the very top. I want to preserve some of that blue hint. Maybe just tap it in places, but I want to preserve some of it certainly. So don't overdo that. It's easily done. And yeah, as we come further down, we can just add a few more bands of that warm colour, like so. And that already is starting to create quite a nice effect. But we are going to create another layer on top, layer 5, And I'm going to go back to the organic rainforest brush again. I'm going to use the third colour that we did skip. We're going back to it. And again, a lower size, maybe 2% and 20% opacity again. And just maybe at the lower part of some of these dark bands, we're going to have some breakaway textures. The light is perhaps just going to capture the edge and just bring out this little bit of texture that kind of moves across these sections. So I can tap it in, press lightly, although the texture itself is quite good at creating some slightly more randomized points and marks. It's better to kind of move your gestures around a little bit in addition to that, so you're adding a little bit of your own random quality as well as the actual brush itself. And then we can bring that a little bit further down as well. And then more texture and bands of this lighter colour as we come even further down. Then I'm going to go to the adjustments, Gaussian blur, blur that in again. This time it's about the 7%, works. Okay, create a new layer, layer 6. And we're going to change the blend mode from normal, where it shows that little N symbol, tap on there. As you can see, by default it's on normal. Scroll down, change it to the add. And with our soft brush within airbrushing up to 80%, yep, you heard me right, 80% size, which is pretty massive, and down to about 10% opacity, which is really low. And we're going to use the second colour from the right, this orange. I'm going to decide where to put the sun. Now I'm thinking about here, and you can just tap in a few times using that glow. And the great thing about this blend mode is when you use it, it just really brings out such a strong sense of a really nice luminous glow. I'm then going to reduce that from 80% to 40. Again, where the sun is, tap it a few times, 4 or 5 times, reduce it down to about 20. Again, tap it 4 or 5 times, and we're starting to really build in that effect now. I'm probably going to do this on a separate layer, so I'll create a new layer on top. Again, change the blend mode from normal to add. I'm still using the soft brush within airbrushing. I'm going to turn it down to about 3% size and stay at around the 10% opacity. And I can now start to just move along the bottom edges of some of these clouds. The sun, the glow is going to really just pick out the little bits of texture along that bottom edge especially. And we can do that all along our cloud bank. Let me zoom in a little bit more. But that doesn't mean that we can't pick up other light on the top edge of clouds too. So it's not exclusively the bottom edge. Obviously the sun is in the very far distance, so any sense of the sun being above or below is a little bit mute. So any sense of the sun truly being above or below the clouds is not quite right. It is very much in the distance. It will slightly show more reflection on the bottom edge if it's lower in the sky, but not exclusively. Anyway, so bringing in some more bands of this light tone from the edges. From the 3%, 2% size, we could put it up to 5%, just in and around this area, start to build up the regions above too. Just expand perhaps the impact up there. Have it a little bit on the edges and the peripheral too, but not as much, obviously. Reduce it back down to the 2%, and maybe just some nice sharp lines that again cut across the very top. And obviously on the underside too. Maybe I'll change from the orange to the yellow that's next to it. And we can really just start to ramp up some of this drama with the yellow too. The yellow is really quite saturated, so you have to go a little bit sparingly with it. So I would typically only do this for the actual sun area, and then we're probably going to bleach that out with more of a white anyway. So I'm going to put it up to about 5%, still only at the 10% opacity. And we can just start to bring that in. And I'm also using a combination of the low opacity plus very light pencil pressure. So as we get towards those edges, I'm just fading out the yellow with a really light pencil pressure too, and it's the combination. And then we'll switch from that to maybe not quite the white is a bit severe, but we'll go for this colour, which is fifth in from the left, and also it's smack bang in the middle basically, isn't it? And then where we want the sun to be, we can just, still with the 5% size, maybe a bit stronger, 20% opacity, just start going over this area and building in the white, the intensity of this sun. Now the 20% does seem a bit strong, so I'm going to reduce that down really low for those edges at about 5%. And it allows me to perhaps just go over and blend those in better together. I want this sun to be super kind of bleaching out the cloud and the detail in that area, just like that. But then as it gets further off, it kind of dissolves. I think that works better. Reduce it down to the 2% again, still at the 5% opacity. And again, we can just pick up some of these highlights on the bottom edges of some of these clouds. Have some breakaway little sections that are just feeding into the center glow area. And as we come down into this lower section, we can have some things that you don't really need to specify exactly what the shape they are. What's cloud, what's the edges of things, it almost doesn't matter because it just kind of dissolves together in this glow. Right, so I'll just put it up to about the 4%, and then just a hint more of it up here, especially when it's directly above where the sun is going to be in our scene, and we can just further push the glow on the edge of that cloud as well. Again, back down to the 2% if you want any little finer tuned kind of breakaway textures. Now with the eraser set to the soft brush 2, I'm going to put that down to about 2% size, and again low at 10% opacity. And I'm just going to start erasing to some extent some of the detail down here on this layer, start to add a sense that there's some low-lying clouds here too. And I can also go back a layer onto layer 6. I'm going to, in addition to that, just start to bring in some sort of textures of this cloud down here as well. Something like this. Okay, we'll do a little bit more with the sky later on, but we're going to push forward. Okay, create another layer, layer 8. We'll keep the blend mode at normal this time. And with the soft brush with an airbrushing, I'm going to use the orange that's near the end of the top row. I'm going to have it at around 2% size and low on the opacity, so somewhere around 5%, so really quite low. And I'm just going to build up some of the dark tones here at the bottom part. Just before we start getting onto land, I just want there to be some extra kind of dark features here. So similar to up here, to the sun, and the glow is kind of sandwiched between some darker forms and darker tones. Okay, going to create a new layer, layer 9. Again, still on the normal blend mode. I'm going to move to the medium brush with an airbrushing, and I'm going to use the first colour on the middle row, set at 5% size and 100% opacity. It's because I'm going to change the opacity on the layer by tapping on the little N, and I can change the layer opacity later. But it's better, really, just to use the brush at 100% opacity initially. And just below the dark colours that I've added, I'm going to add in a little bit of a rise, kind of distant hills, something like this. Don't need to worry too much. I'm just going to drag, flood fill that bottom area. Again, I've got a little bit of a gap, but I haven't let go, and I can slide it both ways so that it fills that in basically, like so. I can reduce it down to be a bit more accurate, so 2% size now, and I can just go in and I can nudge the edge to be exactly where I want it to be. And this bit's going to be obscured anyway. So like I say, the layer we can go on to now, so we tap on the N symbol, and we can turn the opacity down, probably somewhere to about the 80%. And it just subdues it a hint more. I'm going to create a layer on top of that, so layer 10. Go back to my colours, and I'm going to use the second colour on the middle row. And I might just change to the organic rainforest brush. I'm going to have it at 2% size and 20% opacity. And I'm just going to build in a little bit more texture in the kind of bottom area of this. Again, not over here because it's going to be obscured anyway, but in this lower section, just adding a bit more texture in here. like this. Don't need to do too much. And then we're also going to use the blur a little bit, so go to the adjustments, Gaussian blur, and just blur it in a hint, so 2% is plenty. Okay, going to create another layer, layer 11, and we're going to go to the third colour on the middle row, and I'm going to use the organic rainforest brush. I'm going to have it at 2% size and about 60% opacity, and I'm just going to build in a selection of maybe some trees, things that stick up, bushes. Don't have to get too bogged down in the detail, just a suggestion is probably sufficient. It's not going to be the real focal points anyway, so just a hint of something can go a long way, and then you can just kind of blot in the lower portion of that. It's going to have other colours and other features there anyway. And I might as well stay on the same layer, but I'm going to move to the first colour on the last row, the bottom row, the first colour. Still on the same brush, still on 2% size and still on 60% opacity. And I can use this now to build in more features. This time they're just going to bring it forward. So we've got different layers, some that are slightly more distant and some that just really cut in front a little bit. Something like this. So you've got a couple of different layers of trees and bushes and things, like so. Maybe then you could switch to the airbrushing medium brush again, 1% size, 40% opacity, and just go in there, build in maybe a couple of trees that aren't evergreen and just have like the bare branches. We have got snow, it is winter, so just spend just a few moments building in some trees perhaps that just look a bit more dead in the winter. Maybe add the hints of kind of tree trunks in the centre of some of these shapes as well. Again, don't get too bogged down in this. Just really a suggestion can go quite a long way. Okay, I'll stay on the same layer, but I'm going to move along to the fourth colour on the middle row. Perhaps I'll just move to the soft brush this time. Lowest part at 2% and quite low at around 15% opacity, and I'm just going to start building in some kind of distant snow, some features that are just going to catch the light a little bit, maybe even lower on the sides of the brush, so the lowest part at 2% and a bit higher, so double it to 30% opacity, and then really we can just get a bit more fine detail put in there. But you know, I'm not spending huge amounts of time on this detail. Detail doesn't mean necessarily that you have to agonize over it. It just means that you're getting a finer grain texture in there with a few individual points that you can add in more manually. Maybe just increase it up to the larger part, 2%, and just have another bank of snow that cuts across in this bottom section. Move across to the fifth colour. It's a slightly warmer colour. Reduce it back down to the lowest part of 2%, stay at the 30% opacity, and I can just add some of this into the mix so it doesn't become too flat. Add some hints of kind of highlighted bits. Okay, we're going to create another layer, layer 12, and with the first colour on the bottom row, and the artistic leatherwood brush, I'm going to build in some land features from both sides. So we're going to start over on this side to begin with. I'm just going to build in maybe a tree trunk here, and then I've done this on many different tutorials before, but this idea of just rocking backwards and forwards to create this, especially with this brush, to create this sense of foliage. Really quite a simple, straightforward and effective way of creating this type of tree. And you can have another smaller one there, so just initially piece in a tree trunk. If you press lightly with this brush, you can get a really nice tree trunk mapped in there, and then kind of blot it in on this side. So that's straightforward for that side. For this side, well, I'm going to take it to maybe about here, maybe just preserve that tree a little bit. I quite like that one. to maybe just dip down with the edge where it meets the water, and then up here, and then upwards again. I mean, you could always, for example, once you've got your landmass mapped in, so we could do a bit of a sense of this is where the trees are going to be growing from. Once you've done that, you could always go in maybe with the airbrushing medium brush, set it down to, I don't know, 1% size and maybe 80% opacity, and you could just build in where you want your trees to be, the trunks to be. You don't have to do every single one, but maybe if there's a few that you want to be definite positions, then you could map those in now, and that'd be quite useful. Then, like I was saying, go back to the artistic leatherwood brush, zoom in a little bit. Now, I'm not zooming in all the way with this type of tutorial. I'm more about helping you create the overall effect. If you want to spend your own time zooming in and getting every little detail absolutely perfect, then I do encourage you to do that. But really, I'm just about getting to the point where we can achieve the effect in relatively quick amount of time. But I'm just rocking left to right with this textured brush, and when we get to the bottom, we just sort of scribble it in, but it's actually very effective. And then again, for the low-lying ones, just less separation. Some of them perhaps are going to be really dense, and other ones you get some real gaps where you can start to see the tree trunk kind of appearing through. Bit of variation I think is useful. Perhaps even turn the size of that brush down to the absolute lowest of 2%. Now, some of these branches are going to become heavier because they're going to be laden with snow, and even without snow, the branch itself is, when it's bigger, going to be heavier, so we get more of a downward movement for the branches as we get lower down. So we can just exaggerate that a little bit, although this bottom section is probably just going to be obscured anyway. You're not going to see the light through, therefore you won't really see those branches and shapes so much. And yeah, this can be a really quick exercise. When we add the snow, it's going to be a little bit more time consuming, but initially getting these shapes in, it can be really quick. So let's just plow forward and get all of those in place. And maybe just plotting a little bit where the land, the kind of riverbank is going to be, a little bit there too. It's going to be covered in snow, we're not going to see this dark colour coming through very much really, but we may as well just put it in place. Okay, I'm going to go to the adjustments, Gaussian blur, blur it in to about 2%. Just takes some of the sharpness off those shapes and softens them in just a little bit so it works better. Before we go any further, I'm just going to go and remove that layer or untick it. Then I'm going to go to the wrench symbol, copy canvas within the add section and paste it. Then under the transform, flip it vertically, deselect it, and I'm going to just remove the top section now of that duplicated detail. So I'm on the eraser, I don't know, put it on the hard brush, 20% or so, 100% opacity, and just remove that top section till we get rid of that bit of land. Then we can go back to the transform, just move it down to roughly where we want it to be. And I'm going to do it quite low down. Now you can move upwards and downwards, but obviously it needs to be directly below. So there should be about right. Now you've got a very hard edge to that, so you can go in with the eraser, maybe something like the soft brush, turn it down to 4% or so, 40% opacity, and you can just chip away at that edge a little bit just so it's not quite so glaring. Much of this is going to be obscured by other things anyway. Then we can go back and put our trees back in now, and we're going to do similar on our tree layer. We're going to duplicate that by sliding and duplicating it, put it on the very top. So we take one of the duplicates and just move it up, transform, flip vertically, and move it down so we get the nice reflection. Then we can go to the adjustments, motion blur, and I don't know, somewhere about the 15% looks about right. So I'm going to create a layer on top of that, change the little N to the Add blend mode, and with the airbrushing soft brush, again change back to this orange on the top row at the end, set to about 6% size and 10% opacity, and it's really now a chance to just blend this in a little bit more. And I don't mind if it goes over some of this reflection too, so we can just again further push back some of this reflection of the tree, have it kind of really diminished by the glow somewhat. You can just push that in and around, have it obscure it a little bit more. Same on this side. And the great thing is you can go over where the sun is and it doesn't diminish any of the whiter colours, it only gets rid of some of the darker colours on top, which is great. Change to the yellow colour on the end, and again, maybe just reduce down a little bit more to about 4%. We've got this edge here that I just want to diminish too. Just fade that in a little bit more, I think that works better. We can create another layer on top, layer 16, and this is where we can start having fun with the snow colours. So I've got these colours on the bottom to begin with, and now we can start going in with some of the blue colours for the snow detail. So I'm going to start with a darker colour first of all. So I'm going to start maybe with this fourth colour along on the middle row. It's almost a purple really. And with the soft brush set to 2% size and only 10% opacity, I'm just going to add some of this colour, especially on this bank as it kind of meets the water. We can extend that across a little bit as well. I've got lighter blues that I'm going to use quite a lot, but initially let's just get some of this, maybe a grass area just in front of where the trees are that is gathering a lot more snow, and we can do the same over on this side as well. Okay, I'm going to stay on the same layer, but I'm going to change my brush to the organic rainforest brush. Probably going to change to this much lighter blue, first of the light blue colours on the bottom row. I'm going to put it down to the lowest part of 2% and maybe about 30%. No, let's go for it. A bit higher at 40%. And then we're just going to start adding some features. In fact, I'm going to turn it even lower, so into the 1% size. And why not go for the opacity even stronger, so about 60%. Admittedly, the texture of this brush is not going to be too apparent at that smaller brush size, but it does have a little bit more life than something like the airbrush, and just a bit more suitable. So when we come into some of the tree shapes, you can really just start to add some kind of bands. Gaps are just as important when you're adding snow, so you can add some sections that seem to run the extent of some of the branches, but then leave some gaps too. It really helps build in the texture of the tree itself. Pick out some of the ones that you think should be more prominent. You don't have to do every single one, so it might be some of the ones that are just peeking out behind to more forward ones. It could be mainly left in silhouette. So I'm kind of doing it in tapping motions, just sweeping across left to right. It's not a particularly refined process, you're just adding some, seeing what it looks like, see if there's anywhere else that needs to add a bit more. I'm allowing it to maybe just disappear a little bit as it gets more towards the top. As we get closer to the sun, probably we're going to get a bit more of a silhouette effect, so I'm not going to do too much over here. Maybe just a few points, just literally kind of scattergunning that a little bit. And there's nothing wrong with allowing some areas to have bigger shapes, bigger blobs if you like of snow. And then pick another one. And if you wanted to, just turn the opacity down somewhat to more like 20%, and you could really just add lots of little points of texture in some of these more background areas. You don't want them to be empty, but they're not going to be as prominent. Again, back up. Where were we? About 60%. Bring out one or two, just make them a bit more prominent again. And obviously we need to go and add some on to this side as well. I'm going to put the brush size up to 3% size, and just in this bottom section I'm just going to do a light sweep of it across and then go over it again and then bring it down a bit further for this section over here as well. I'm going to switch to the next blue along. It's even lighter, going down to the lowest part of 2%, and yeah, we can just create some, I guess, some features and anomalies in here so it doesn't look too similar. A little bit of variation usually helps, especially in the ones that are just a little bit more prominent perhaps. Again, I'm going to go to the adjustments, Gaussian blur, blur it in a couple of percent. Also with the, perhaps the medium brush on the soft brush this time, with the first colour on the bottom row, the brush size up to 4% and 80% opacity. I'm just going to have perhaps a piece of land in the snow just cutting in front on this side. And then maybe just a little bit of an outcrop cutting into the water on this side too. Perhaps just reduce it down to the 2% so I can really control that edge. Maybe a lower section that just kind of merges in there. And maybe just a little bit of something over on this side too, not too much. Then with the next lighter colour, I can create a top section where it catches the light a little bit more. I mean, it's quite strong on the 80% opacity, maybe just reduce that down to about 50. But still, the top edge is just catching the light a little bit more than the other section. We can even exaggerate the shadow. Maybe go for the first blue on the top row. Maybe just on the bottom edge, we can just run along that a little bit, create a sense that there is, looks like a shadowed bit. And perhaps with the same blue underneath, we'll leave a slight sliver of a gap that is going to be like a darker shadow, and we can just create a sense that it's creating a reflection too. If you need to just go in and sharpen that up, you can do. Use the darker colour, reduce it down to 1%, zoom in, just further refine that a little bit. And again with that lighter colour too. Maybe just have it rounding off into the edge there, kind of merges with it. And then even with a lighter colour still, maybe just like we've got a light colour on the very top with these shapes, maybe we'll also just notice it a little bit reflected, mirrored in the bottom section too. So 50% or so, just a hint of it across that bit there. Maybe with a fourth colour on the middle row, we can just kind of add a slight hint that there's more shadow, perhaps in the reflection, just a slightly more subdued version of it. We don't want it to be too vibrant, it's going to be just a little too distracting. And with the soft brush and this lighter blue on the very end, set down to about 10% opacity and 2% size, we're just going to build in some of this light colour on the very top, perhaps even lower, end of 2% and a little higher, 30% opacity, and I can just build in a nice crisp top edge where required. And we can extend that further up as well, have more similar things up here. So I'm going to take the third colour on the middle row. I'm doing all this on the same layer, why not? And I'm just going to start building in some darker tones, things that just cut in these sections. Maybe just extend some of these. So it's a similar effect to this, but it just has a slightly different impact. So perhaps you just notice the dark edges rather than the reflections so much. And of course we can go in there with maybe the two colours here, so the darker blue initially. We can just add some more snow over onto these bits over here as well. We have this section in the foreground, I'm probably going with a lighter colour, and I might switch to the artistic leatherwood brush for this, set to, well, 3% size and about 20% opacity, so thereabouts, and just add some of this texture. chip away with the eraser on any of this edge that we're not entirely happy with, soften it in a little bit, and again with the highlight colour, perhaps reduce that brush down a little bit just to really get an edge we're happy with. Go back to my airbrushing soft brush, and just maybe in this section we need a hint that perhaps it's just not quite as clear cut. Some of the blues and the oranges are merging together, so we're going to go for the first blue on the top row, 2% size and maybe about 15% opacity. And we can just start feeding in some of this blue to this area and over here. And I even think that really we could add a bit more blue over to this side too. Just really concentrate the eye and the warmth into this region. So perhaps I need to go onto a previous layer for that effect though. I might even go back to the reflection of the trees, go to the selection tool, freehand, draw around that section of tree there, then go to the adjustments, motion blur, and just blur it in even more. And that's starting to help. Could even go in with the smudge tool, set to the soft brush, 3% size and 40% opacity, and we could do some of it more manually too. It doesn't all have to be motion blur. Again, we can just take control of it a little bit more by hand. I think that helps. Back up to the top layer with the soft brush, 5% size and 5% opacity, and I'm just going to continue to add some of this slightly cooler blue into this bottom section over here and over and up here as well. Maybe even one of the lighter blues, maybe the middle of the light blue up here. Okay, so I'm going to create a new layer, layer 17. I'm going to change the blend mode from normal to add once more. I'm going to go in with the orange colour again, with the soft brush again. I'm going to put the brush down to about 15% size, 5% opacity, and I think I just want to push back some of this region. Just go over it a few times, have it kind of soften in a bit more, like so. Then I'm going to reduce it down to 2% size, stay at the 5% opacity, and I'm just going to dapple in some texture. In fact, I'll turn the opacity up to 10%. I'm just going to dapple in almost like there's mist, because this is the sunrise, and as the sun comes up, then the ice and the snow starts to warm up, and then obviously it rises up as steam. So a little bit of that on the kind of water's edge, bring some of that glow across there, I think, as well. Perhaps we'll even add some sun rays, so I'm going to go in with about the 3% size and 5% opacity, and just jutting out from the sun. I'm going to have those rays that get more diffuse and broader as they move away from the actual sun. Just subtly, you don't want to overdo it. And then we can bring that down too. Maybe just a little bit with one of the yellows. So I'm going to go for this yellow, so fourth in from the right, and maybe just allow it to extend some of that super bright yellowy white upwards a little bit more, just softly brushing that in. Again, I don't want it to be too strong. Okay, I'm going to leave this tutorial here at this point. I hope you've enjoyed following along. If you have, please don't forget to give this video a thumbs up. If you did like it, hit the subscribe, and don't forget that all important bell notification. I also have an Instagram account and a Facebook group. If you want to share your versions with me, then the links for those are down in the video description. Thanks for watching. I shall catch you back here soon.